Hey everyone, welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I am Nicole van der Hoeven.
Hey, and my name is Floor, and I am your simmer for this week. Just filling in for simmer this week. So here it is me again, and we have a guest.
Yay!
Do I introduce myself now?
Absolutely.
Sure.
I'm Kevin. I'm guest. Do I need to tell you myself? Or does this work?
Is he also kind of going in
I
and out
just
for
wanted to
you?
ask: is Kevin breaking up for you as well?
I
All
was
right,
thinking, is it me? Is it? I
it
don't
is
know.
not you. It is, I think, both of us. Um,
Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, I think it's better now if you want to give it another go.
Oh, well, I get a second try. I'm Kevin. I guess I'm the guest who's in and out intermittently tonight, as the Wi-Fi allows.
Keeps it exciting, I think.
Keep you on your
Yeah.
toes.
Absolutely. And Kevin,
So,
I read because of course I was looking you up a little bit, and you have a Master of Science in Entrepreneurship, and then also in International Marketing Management, and a BA in Economics, and a minor in Computer Science. And I'm just like, what?
Um, Asian parents or parent?
That
Sort
is
of expected.
a lot.
Well,
That,
my
I get
mother has
that.
two
Yeah.
master's degrees, and my father has a PhD and a master's. I feel like it was almost expected. There was no question about it. You're gonna go to grad school. Just that was the path. And then I also really wanted to do my own thing, so that's why the entrepreneurship.
yeah,
And
which is that's cool.
the marketing was actually just because I wanted to stay. I did it in Sweden, and I like living there. So the easiest way to
Oh,
continue to
okay.
stay was just get another master's degree,
Huh.
and they were free, so the price was pretty good. And
All
coincidentally, it
right.
actually led to my company.
Yeah. So where are you
So
based
tell
now?
us about your company.
Uh,
Sorry.
Both
I
questions.
am in I'm in Thailand right now for the last year and a half. What started
Awesome.
as supposed to be 3 months, and then I think we all know what happened. And now it's been a year and a half, and at some point I will probably leave. I couldn't tell you when though.
Okay.
Uh, and the second question was,
What do you
you got
do?
to
What
remind.
does your company do?
Right. So my company is called Review Signal. I do web hosting reviews. So the original idea was take what people say in social media, Twitter, scrape all the opinions that people complain about or recommend, compliment, all that stuff, millions and millions of voices, and see if we can distill that down into some easy to understand way of, do people like this company or not? And a little bit about why. So that was the original idea. And that came from the master's degree, where I scraped Twitter data and predicted which box office movies would make how much money. And it worked really well for that. And then nobody will pay you for that. So I ended up with web hosting, which was an area that I'm quite familiar with and been a developer of making websites since I was 11. So it just worked. So that was the original company, and nobody cared about doing that for the most part, and until I started benchmarking WordPress. Somebody bet me that oh, their WordPress hosting, it was GoDaddy, bet me that WordPress hosting was as anyone on the market, and that was 8 years ago. And I went, that's a
Wow.
interesting bet. Do you mind if I actually check that? And I had to go out and use some of the load testing tools that existed back then and actually run these and figure out, how do I compare in a nice apples to apples way which web hosting companies perform better or worse than others. And
Okay, so let me
that's
actually open up your site so you can kind of talk to it a little bit. So this is Kevin's site, WordPress hosting WP hosting benchmarks.com. So
we're not
there's
allowed to use
a
WordPress
lot.
in a domain name.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's interesting. So these are all of the hosting providers that you've tested. And you were saying that originally the plan was to look at reviews for them on Twitter and kind of rank the hosting providers based off of that. But it seems like you quickly moved to a more quantitative approach.
So this is brand new. This launched less than a month ago, looking at the calendar.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
so if you actually scroll to the top, and you can see it says the Review Signal Company under the header. If you click
Mm-hmm.
that link in a new window, you can actually see the original.
Oops. Okay.
So yeah, this was the original. And this is what's scraping all the Twitter data.
Nice.
And those benchmarks you see on the WP benchmarks, they used to be a blog post. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, because I was really good at design, that's not true. Like click on that pink one, the WooCommerce. That's from 2020. So this is what they used to look like. They were just a blog post on this website. And
Mm.
I wrote everything here. It was an absolute nightmare to maintain and publish. And after 7 years of doing it this way, as just a blog post, I thought, I work with data. I work with
Yeah.
visualization. This is an absolute nightmare. I really need to separate these things out. You know, these are Excel visualizations on all the data. So as of this year, less than a month ago, WPHostingBenchmarks.com launched to visualize that same data. So you can see the same one if you click that WooCommerce pill. So those are all the different price tiers and types there. So there's only
Oh, I
one
see.
WooCommerce. And then if you click on View Full Results, that is the 2021 version of that blog post. So it
Mm.
looks a little bit nicer, I hope. Or if it doesn't, just lie
Okay.
to me.
It does. No, it definitely does. So tell us about what you were thinking of, like what considerations you had when you're thinking about testing these hosting providers. Did you have any initial issues or concerns?
So the biggest concern is most of the time load testing, you're using it for your own application. You're trying to
Yeah.
figure out when do things break. So when I went about this, it seems like a relatively rare and obscure use case of how do I equally compare things with load tests. And I've worked with at least half a dozen probably load testing companies over the last 8 years on
Wow.
trying to run these benchmarks. And I think I don't think any one of them has ever said, "Oh yeah, we have somebody that does that," or "We've done that before." It's always, "Oh, that's different, odd."
Unique.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's been an interesting thing that I've had to do, and I guess nobody else has really done it. A few people have, in the past few years, have run smaller scale versions of what I've been doing for a long time, but there wasn't a lot to model on. So the question became, how do you design a apples to apples benchmark to compare between hosting companies? And they often offer very different platforms, and I've had to, the industry evolves. So there are some new companies out there that do, WordPress, but static WordPress.
Hmm.
They, convert everything to a
Yeah.
static site. They want to participate in these benchmarks. And I'm like, well, I don't know how to accommodate that because my script logs people in some of the tests, and you don't have a login. That's part of like the set. So it's been a constantly evolving thing. And the biggest thing is, how do I make it as fair as possible to the participants? And then how do you fairly present that data that isn't saying, X is better than Y because load testing, and it's not just a this is better than that because Z. There's a lot of nuance and understanding, and it's hard to communicate that. So it's been a interesting and kind of tricky proposition, and I have to balance the interests of the companies and consumers.
Yeah. So what aspects were you looking at comparing across all of these hosting providers?
So I broke it down to only performance, and I defined the performance as the consistency and the peak. So the load testing components are about the peak performance. Can it handle a surge in traffic? What happens if your website goes viral and somebody shares it on Reddit or Instagram and everyone's there?
Yeah.
And then the consistency part is kind of uptime monitoring. Doesn't really matter if you can handle all these users if the website's not online.
Yeah, I think that might be really difficult as well, actually, thinking about it, because normally when you're performance testing or load testing, you have one application and you might be comparing versions of it or different configurations. But with you kind of have to take a step back and test the infrastructure components that are common across all sites that use WordPress. So that's a little bit of an interesting take on the performance testing, I think.
Yeah, I get a lot of people asking me, I test a pretty much stock WordPress sites. So the WordPress benchmarks are a stock WordPress site. This year was with the latest theme, and the WooCommerce is just using, I think, the most popular storefront theme, and it uses WooCommerce's test data. And people are always like, that's unrealistic. You need to use some big heavy theme that's popular or this and that. And I'm like, well, there's 100 of them. And then I'm kind of testing really specifically the performance of that plugin or that theme. And for those people who run that, that's probably great. And then for the other people, that's a lot less useful and it's a lot of work. So it took me about 7 months to do that each year.
Wow.
From start to finish. I mean, I'm not working full time on it, but from corralling companies, getting them signed up. I mean, this year, I think I was like somewhere around 85 hosting plans, setting up 85 sites, running how many tests? So probably 200 load tests alone, plus there's 5 or 6 other tests that I run on all of them. Yeah, it's a it's a job.
Yeah, and when you're trying to get so many different hosting providers, I mean, there's always going to be a chance, not a chance, but of course you'll always miss some use cases or some different types of sites. But when you have that many to test, you kind of just have to choose something that they all host and go with it. So I think it was a good approach.
I mean, that's why I went with the stock WordPress. And I said, well, this is the base use case. I generally expect performance would correlate because everything's built on top of this. There may be specific optimizations for specific scenarios where one might do better than another in that optimized one. But in general, I'd expect a relatively good correlation. And that's kind of the defense of why do you just test a basic site versus something more complex.
Mm-hmm.
So just out of interest, and because I love a little drama, has there ever been a company that's been published and then afterwards didn't really like the position they were put in and asked you to retract the data? I'm curious.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you respond?
Almost every year there'll be a company that participates that would like to opt out later. My position is no. Once you've opted in and I've begun testing, I'm going to publish the results no matter what. And over the years, there's been some very interesting cases. Because it's load testing, I always do it with permission because
that's good. That's a good
take
thing
down.
to note too.
Yeah, because a lot of people ask me, oh, why don't you test this company? Everything's entirely opt-in. And it's because I can't run a denial of service attack against an unsuspecting company. That wouldn't be ethical. But I had one company get acquired in the middle of testing once, and they just stopped responding. And, there was, I often run into security measures. You guys must be used to that, of different security measures triggering, and I can't get by them on my own, but nobody was there. They got acquired, and my contact and every contact I had there went dark in the middle of testing, and it just went, well, I'm just going to finish and publish what I have, but I don't know what to do. That was a new one. But every year somebody is not happy with the results. Most years there'll be a company or two that withdraw or ask to. They get stuck. I have let some withdraw before testing has happened. So they sign up, we get ready, we talk, and then we realize actually this is not. But as long as I haven't started running any tests and it was bad, like that's the reason. I have let a couple, for whatever reason, leave. Sometimes it's been personal stuff. Sometimes it's been actually this just isn't a good fit. Like we can't run these tests. So it can be awkward, and I don't rank them, which is another
It's
way
probably
that
good.
try to minimize a little bit of that. I just kind of put them in tiers of these are the ones that handled every test without showing any signs of struggle. Here's the ones that did pretty well. There might have been a little issue here and there, and then there's everyone else. Because I don't really want to make anyone look bad. I want them to improve. And I spend a lot of time talking to these companies, at least the ones that are open to it. If I see issues, I'm happy to bring them up, and I want to see them make their services better for consumers, because I feel like that's a win for everyone. And so some companies year after year come back and have improved and improved, and some participate once, don't do well, and never come back again.
Right. So do you also mention that they have improved so much or over the course of the years when presenting the results?
I sometimes write that. There's a little analysis at the end about the companies, and I try and write a little something colorful if they improve from the year before. I like to mention it. That's great. I like to see that. And in this new website, if you actually go to a company profile page, I've only loaded 2 years of data. I haven't actually backported everything because the tests evolved over different years, so it's a little bit tricky. But you can actually see how they did last year. You can see the 2010 results. There's like a little column of stars. They did well here, here, and here, or didn't do well. So you can usually visualize that. And I like to highlight that if it's getting better.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk tools. What exactly did you use for your performance testing?
Okay, so the two tools for load testing were K6, shocking.
What?
And
what is that awesome tool?
What a coincidence. So K6 was one of them, and the other was LoadStorm. Those are the two load testing tools that I've been using for, I was going to say a few years, but K6 was the first time this year. I used Load Impact before that, which was your previous. I don't know how you guys, do you still talk about that, or is that like the tool with no name?
No, we still talk about it. A lot of it carried over, including the team. Load Impact is also still the official company that the company name that we operate under. But you can just say K6. But I am curious, and you can be totally honest here. Why did you feel the need to also use LoadStorm? Was there anything that LoadStorm offered that you felt K6 didn't?
So I started using LoadStorm years and years and years ago, and they have been the longest standing load testing tool I've used. And one of the things I value most about these benchmarks is being able to compare year over year. So I don't like to change tools. I add new ones,
Makes
but I really
sense.
don't like to change unless I'm forced to, because the consistency and actually seeing improvement is really important. And so I added K6, actually or Load Impact replaced. I don't even know. I think there was one in between, but it was Blitz.io was back in the day. If you're familiar, they
I've
got
heard of it, but
acquired
I
and
haven't used
they
it.
disappeared ages ago.
Oh,
But it
okay.
was probably the most popular load testing tool a decade ago. You just put in a URL and it would bash it and tell you, here's the response time and make pretty graphs. So that's what everybody did for very simple testing. And they went out of business or acquired, and that tool came down. So it had been replaced a couple times, and Load Impact basically took that spot. And K6 continues to fill that spot.
Okay, well, maybe that's a good time to go through your actual K6 script. I thought it was interesting because you shared it, and I think that's really good. Whenever I look for benchmark type blog posts or articles, I always want it to be repeatable, because otherwise you don't really know if there was something specific about that person's setup. So I thought it was awesome that you included it here.
Oh yeah, that's a big part of what I do. Is that's actually why I use K6 and LoadStorm and every other tool. Is there are some benchmarking or load testing tools out there, the open source stuff. I mean, you guys are open source too. I can run K6 without you, and have before, but don't tell anyone. It runs, and so I could build it all myself and run it off my own servers and
Yeah.
save a bunch of money. Won't tell anyone that, but a
No,
big
I
problem
mean,
with that is that I lose kind of that repeatability. I have to pick a server. I have to set it up.
yeah.
Everything is on
Yeah.
me, and I don't have that reporting, and I don't really want to set it up in a whole bunch of locations and
Yeah.
10 locations. So, and also, if anything goes wrong, I can email somebody. But I can also
Well,
link to you guys and say, here's the results. Everybody can see the script. Everybody can sign up for a K6 account and run this exact thing again. It's
yeah.
entirely repeatable and not my
And
problem.
by the way, we would still have you on if you didn't use K6 Cloud. It's totally okay to use the free version. Not everybody has to use the cloud version. It's
I
only for
like the free
specific
version too.
cases.
I
Yeah.
ran some very large tests with it just for fun. Uh,
Yeah.
but I enjoy the tool. It's really
The
nice to just be able to
convenience.
script things. Yeah. And test very specific stuff and feeling a lot of control over that as a developer.
So let's look at what you're doing here. Right off the bat, this is a great reason to use the cloud, because here you're specifying a bunch of different availability zones. We use AWS, so you have access to their zones, and I imagine that this is essential for testing hosting providers, because if you were just picking one of these, say if you were just testing from Virginia, that's really going to heavily favor the hosting providers that maybe have more servers in the US around that area. And I think that you also ran into some of those issues or interesting data points. I think that there was one where let's see here about, I think I read it in the methodology. There was some weird thing where one of them had a higher response time for Sydney in particular. I can't
Yeah,
remember
it
exactly where that would
happens.
be.
Um, like I know from experience in running these tests, I mean, companies have had
There you go.
Issues, yeah, you can see the web page tests can highlight pretty. I love this graph, and some people tell me they hate it because it's completely impossible to read and understand. And I think there's a table version of it too, but
No, but
for
it's
me,
interesting. No, you see a good outlier there. That's
yeah, and you can see, which companies have the best. I mean, really, this is testing CDNs.
Mhm.
How well are you distributing your content? And, when a company has their circle on the outside like that, that's the slowest CDN or no CDN at all, potentially. And you can tell where the server is too, generally. You're like, oh, almost every company is fast in the US, and most of them are pretty fast in Europe too. That's where most of the servers are. That's where the
Yeah.
connectivity is. If there's multiple locations, I pick a US location just because that's where a lot of the tooling and everything, it kind of tries to keep it as apples to apples as possible. And over the years, that's caused a little bit of issue. I've had companies from faraway places. I think an Australian company or two have participated with servers in Australia, and they look really great on that Sydney test.
Yeah.
But some of the US and European tests, getting traffic off that island is an absolute nightmare. And it doesn't quite feel as fair. And I've had companies approach in years since, and we talk about that. I don't just want everyone's money to come participate. Like, the fee is almost nothing. It costs like $100, which you guys know how quickly that budget gets eaten up in a load test. That's pretty much what it covers. I tell them, like, oh, if you're a local company in this one place, this might not be the best look for you. I'm not here to make you look bad. I want to provide fair benchmarking, but also see you improve. And if your target market is, this little place, and you don't really care about how you respond across the other side of the world, and it's going to look bad, I don't know if you want that. So
I love this because this is something that most people will run across too. The question of where is your audience exactly? Because maybe if you don't have many users from Sydney, from Australia in general, maybe this doesn't matter. But if it's a mostly Australian audience, this is quite a jump. So here they're all, I assume this is in
you
seconds.
can make this look a little bit better. Which company is that? If you highlight the really big outlier.
Yep.
Okay. If you
20i.
scroll up a little bit and click on, nope, back down. Yep. It should
Oh,
adjust
okay.
everything. So you can, if you only
Nice.
care, like you say, I want to know this company and this company, or a few companies, you can actually
Yeah.
adjust everything. This is way better than a
Okay.
blog post.
it really
Yeah.
is.
No, it's great
Yeah.
because that's one of the reasons why cloud is so powerful, because people, like you were talking about the free version and the cloud version, well, the difference is that if you're okay with just simulating all that load from one server or from one location, definitely on premises is probably cheaper if you already have those machines. But in this sort of a test where you're trying to gauge where users are across the world and what their experiences are, it would be difficult to have the same setup without going to load testing on the cloud.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say it'd be impossible, but it would be
Yeah.
probably a huge waste of money and time to build that yourself, unless it was a big company that maybe it'd be worth it when you have a whole engineering team. If I'm Netflix,
Yeah.
maybe sure,
Yeah.
but for everyone
So
else,
I also really like that within the script you're already specifying the percentages. So we can see that you have 10 different zones here, and 10% of the time the script will be run on each of these. so that they all get even allocation, I guess. I think
Yeah.
if you knew a little bit more about the application, like if you were testing a specific one rather than just all hosting providers, one thing that people could do is say, well, for our particular user base, we're heavy in the US, so let's bump this up to 80, get rid of some of these, and then maybe 10%, 5%. It's a cool way to just be able to quickly tweak that percentage, that distribution.
Oh, and they absolutely should. Um, so I do this probably part time now. Is the actual review signal and the benchmarks. I do consulting, and occasionally some of it is stuff like this because, well, I do it. And people are like, oh,
Yeah.
he can do it. But that's exactly what I tell them. Oh, why would you do 10% from all these places? You're running like a U.S. store. All your
Yeah.
customers are in the US, and like maybe some Canadians from across the border sneak over to your website. Why would you run a global load test? You don't care. It
Yeah.
has to fit the use case.
Yeah. Even if you were all in one country, it could still be useful to go to the cloud just from the perspective of using more than one city. So maybe you want a California one in there and a New York one. That can be useful as well.
I'm just curious, do you guys only do Amazon, or do you consider having some other providers?
We only do AWS right now. So basically, whenever you run on K6 Cloud and you use our load generators, that they get provisioned in AWS. I think though, if you wanted to, you could use. There are tools like the K6 operator that you can use to run the free version on really any other cloud provider that you want.
But it'd be
I asked
interesting
that.
to know
Oh,
why
sorry.
do you ask? Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I asked because, again, I have this weird use case that nobody else is doing. A lot of hosting companies use AWS infrastructure.
Mm.
And by
Mm,
default, all my testing tools, I think, are running off AWS for the most part. I know the load testing are. I used the web page tests. A lot of them are AWS servers. So any company using AWS has a very
That's fine.
marginal advantage of. That's
Hmm.
why I can't say this is
good
better
point.
than that, because if you happen to be on the same infrastructure, it's going to be just a few milliseconds faster or more, just
Yeah.
sheer physics.
Maybe
So
you can
that's why
have
I asked.
another scenario that runs on like Google Cloud and another one on Azure. That would be cool to see.
Some guy's cell phone running it.
Yeah, like any
Yeah.
type of infra. So I'm curious, do you paste that as a disclaimer then as well, that you're using?
uh, I don't know if I write that explicitly, but that's another reason why I don't rank.
Right.
Is
Hmm.
there is what I'm looking for when I'm comparing them. It's not necessarily just this responded in 20 milliseconds, this was in 30. There's nuance to that. Oh, they're on some
Yeah.
other provider, they've built their own data center and it's not
Right.
called Amazon. And what I look at is, did the response time fluctuate, did it escalate?
Mm.
If they both stay stable and at a reasonable level, it's not like 3 seconds or something. To me, those are fairly similar
Right.
in a
Rather
lot of
look for
regards.
anomalies somehow.
Yeah, as long as it's within a reasonable range. And I think for the load tests, my limit is 1 second. Um, as long as they're responding on average, below that 1 second mark, and it's not increasing and it's flat, that's
Hmm.
pretty good. And there could be a lot of reasons why. Some of them are single points. Some of them are CDN'd around the world. And now with Cloudflare workers and stuff, they're going to be serving dynamic content right from the edge there. So it's hard to compare. And every year things keep evolving. You're like, how do I make sure this stays fair?
Yeah.
So one
So
thing
that's why I
that
ask.
I Oh, okay.
Cool.
One thing that I did want to mention is I think it would add to realism to, instead of just having the just getting this HTTP body, also probably adding some of the embedded resources of the page. Actually, I think I have the site. So this is your dummy site, right?
That is the dummy site, yes.
So I'm just
It's
opening up
gorgeous.
developer tools here, and I'm going to refresh. So what I was thinking was your that script is only really getting the
Just the home
HTML.
page.
Yeah, so there's still some more resources here. So I think this is CSS and JavaScript and icon there. That would be kind of cool to include in K6 as well, so that it's fetching the response time of the entire page.
So when I said you guys replaced this Blitz tool, um, basically that's what that tool did, and it is just a hammer on the cache. This test is asking the question: do they have a
Mm,
static cache set up, and can it serve it? You know, the enterprise one, I don't remember, is it, I think 5,000 per second? You know, can they install Varnish or Nginx or whatever system and have it just spit this page back to a million people? Because, you know, you have a news site, something not dynamic for a lot of it. Yeah. Um, and I'll be honest, some of the other tests do load all those resources, like the web page test, the LoadStorm
yeah.
loads all of those. And I actually started excluding them when I'm starting to analyze some of the stuff, especially with the WooCommerce, because a lot of them offload it to CDNs and other things, and it actually brings down the average response times very
Yeah, that's
substantially.
what I wanted to see.
Yeah,
More
it does.
realism.
Well, it's realism in that, you know, the average response time on the requests may go down, but if that first request is really slow, like that waterfall, that's the only one I care about. When does the next drop start when it gets all the resources? Because it needs to load that time
Mhm.
to first byte. And so that's
Yeah.
what I've been using K6 for, is I want to know what that time to first byte is. The rest of it,
Mm,
other tests are kind of covering.
yeah. I did just want to. I can understand that it was a different purpose that you were using K6 for. I do want to mention, if you don't mind, I just want to show. Actually, I don't even need to go into the app. I will just copy this. I've got the K6 recorder here as well. And I know I still get questions on social media and that about how do I request all of these resources without manually having to code it. And what I do is I just use the recorder just because it's easy. So I mean, live
So this
demo,
just
but
records
let's
the
see
HAR
how it
file.
works. It does. So I'm going to do this and then go there, and then I'll stop. Oops, I think I recorded in the other one. Let me try that again. Okay, now I'm recording happening on this tab. I've refreshed. And then let me stop that. And that takes me, because I'm already signed in, that takes me back to K6. So it does generate a HAR, so you can just download that and use it elsewhere if you want. But this is just a quick way that I use it to get the script. And up until this point, you need an account for K6, but you don't need a paid account. So this is actually all free. So then you can just copy all of that. And now you have all of those. Oops. Oh, I know what I did. You know what? I
Hit
didn't.
cache.
Let me. Yeah, it cached. And yeah, it said download. That should be fine. I think it might have still cached though. Let
Yeah,
me
I
try.
didn't see any
Oops.
extra resources there.
Yeah. Let me try that again. Probably should have tried it just before. Things are always changing.
No, that's the thing. It's a live demo.
I know, right? I
This is
just
the
thought
charm.
while you're. Oh, here it is. Here's a gotcha. It was my fault. I didn't include static assets. Let me remove that and go to the script editor. Now it should have all of the resources. Okay. So let's look at it here. Yeah, now it's got icon and what is this? CSS. So yeah, it's just kind of a cool way to get everything on that page. And then you could group them so that they still just come up as one page. And then you also have the option to look at each request individually.
I'm curious with that group condition. Is it doing a waterfall or does it just go for everything at once? How does that work?
So there is a way to, let me bring up the docs here. By default, it is sequential, I believe, but you can, oops, you can also do it by parallel, and it's by using something called batching. But what it is that
Okay.
you just put a wrapper around it and you put it in this format, and that way everything will be done in parallel. So that's
Because
kind
that's
of
how some of the
addresses what
modern
you're saying. Yeah.
browsers are starting to do. Yeah. And that's something that I might use K6 for in the future is writing a test like
Yay.
that to see, you know, as we get the newer browsers, now we don't have to request everything in sequence. They can request multi stuff at the same time. So
Yeah.
that might be used. It's kind of been discussed a couple times.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so here it says it's in parallel over multiple TCP connections. And what that would do is it would let you look at the results and see, okay, here's the one for the overall, but I don't know, maybe you'll get some surprises like some hosting providers serve up HTML really quickly, but the CSS is, or the images if there are big ones, maybe they go through another server and it's slower or something like that. I don't know, maybe that's something to consider.
Yeah, it's definitely something I do consider, and I know because some of the other tests do it. Um, I start running into issues that sometimes the hosting companies struggle to debug, where it's the
Yeah.
the occasional assets off of like a CDN, and what if the CDN starts rate limiting the load tools, and they have sometimes less control over that kind of thing. Oh, Cloudflare wants to stick a captcha in the middle of your load tests.
Yeah.
You're like, well, everything's broken, and fun stuff like
I've
that.
run into that problem too, where I get that Cloudflare, that rate limiting page. So when I've had to test it in the past, I actually specifically look for that. So I add a text assertion here to check for that and fail if I see that, because it might return a 200, but it's still an error page.
That's always very helpful when they do things like that.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
also,
why you have that
a
custom
new
header there.
change. Oh, yeah. So what is this header for?
That header is a way for me to set a custom header with all the companies and say, please whitelist this. And
Okay.
that's been one of the ways I try and get around a lot of the security measures. And we
Hmm.
just agree on something, and that way all their firewalls and security systems can ignore these load tests. Hopefully, it's not foolproof, and not everybody has the tech or ability to use headers. So, but that's just one of the ways that I get around it. And it also marks all the traffic. So if they're looking at it later in their
Hmm.
logs, they can find it pretty easily.
And they can
Because
kind of
one,
remove it from their projections.
I think you guys do let you pay for a dedicated IP beforehand, maybe now, or you don't.
I know that we can. I don't know. I'm not sure about the sales side of it. I think that we can.
Yeah. Well, I
But
haven't
yeah, if
used that
anyone,
before. So I get random
yeah,
IPs, and I'm like, well, This is the Amazon IP ranges. That's what we're working with.
Yeah, yeah.
Some
By the way,
unhappy
we
security
do.
people.
Sorry. We do have a new feature as well. It only came out, I think, 2 or 3. I think it was version 0.29, I think. By default, now you don't have to do this because the default behavior is that HTTP 4XX and 5XX response codes are just automatically treated as errors unless you specify otherwise.
Oh,
But I
saving
think
you a
that
line
might
of
have even
code.
happened after you tested, though.
That's possible. These ran probably back in January, February.
Yeah. So are there, maybe let's go back to the methodology because I thought it was also cool that you had all these visualizations. Oh, yes. So K6 and LoadStorm weren't the only ones that you used. You had a bunch of different things that you used and tested for, but you said that I think they weren't included in the benchmark. Is that right?
So yeah, on the left side, there's like that whole index of all the stuff that I'm using. So under load testing, there's LoadStorm and K6. The availability is the uptime and web page test. The
Mm-hmm.
hardware performance is this WP performance tester, which I wrote using some open source benchmarking scripts. And then there was some security tests, the SSL test, and then 2 new ones, which I had never used before, this Internet NL and Mozilla Observatory, which I think pretty much were universally hated by everyone and pretty not helpful. But I ran them and I published the
Okay.
result. Like, I think more than half of the companies all failed the Mozilla
Mm.
Observatory test. Like, and then when
Why?
I
What
see
did they
stuff like
test?
that, I'm like, is this a problem with the test or the companies? And
Exactly. So why is that, do you think?
Yeah.
well, I talked to a lot of them, and a lot of the settings are settings that would be like the users would be responsible for. Let's see what you guys get. That'll be a
Yeah. What do
you
they look
need
for?
a
Oh
oh
no,
F.
it's F.
See,
What does it look
now
for?
you hate that test too.
No, I mean, you have to know what the
uh,
test does before you hate it.
I
We're
mean,
pretty open
this is
here.
the
We will
internet.
admit
Blind
when
rage
we've
is a
gotten things wrong.
well.
It's
It's
not
see
all
that was
sunshine and roses.
that's what they talk about is like some of these settings might mess up client websites, and hosting
Hmm.
companies aren't comfortable just across the board applying different settings. I think the CSP is content security policies. That was one
Hmm.
that they don't want to. A lot of them don't want to apply that for just blindly on every customer site. Um, the what is it? The sub resource integrity.
Oops.
Um, so that's in the
Yeah.
actual code, right? So that's when you link to something, it gives it a hash, and it's a way for the browser to say this, this remote loaded file hasn't been tampered with because the hashes match.
Oh,
Hosting
I see.
companies, that's not their job at all. Like, they don't write your code for you and
Yeah.
check the integrity of these. So I'm not sure it was a great or even
Okay.
helpful test. So this as a
So is that
user,
why
maybe
you
you want to look
don't?
at. So I have
Sorry.
what are called impacting and non-impacting metrics. The only impacting,
Mhm.
or tests rather, LoadStorm, K6, and the uptime are the only impacting tests. If you do well on
Mhm.
those 3, you will get a good mark. You could fail all of the other ones. I'd comment about it because that would be weird, but you would earn the highest marks that I gave if you do those 3 tests well. And because those are the ones that are testing performance. How many users, what is the max? Can they handle a lot of max users? And can they do that consistently? If the answer is yes, that's what my benchmarks do. Everything else is trying to add data points and stuff like web page tests. You showed that little radar graph, and somebody does really poorly in Sydney and they're a company that is based in the US and has US customers. They don't care, maybe. It's not really relevant, but
unless
to
they
a
have
consumer,
expansion plans, then
right. But as a consumer, you can say, I'm in Thailand right now. I need web hosting that's fast here in Southeast Asia. So I want to see how do they perform in Singapore and Mumbai and Japan. Like, okay, maybe those are the numbers I want to look and filter down my list from. And so I like to provide all that data, but it doesn't impact how you get rated as a company. And the
I love
same with
that you
all of the other
also
tests.
I love that you also included front end performance, which is not something that K6 can do yet. We're working on it, but we can't do it. And I know that Floor had a related question on this too, didn't you?
I'm not sure if it's about front. Well, I mean, a question that I have is that and maybe this is too high level, right? But performance is also, I think, sometimes a very subjective thing, right? So you can test for it and you can benchmark sort of objectively, but then there's things that feel more performant than others, even though like they're not. So what are your thoughts about that? Especially because you come from where you were analyzing, Twitter opinions, and those are not objective at all. And then you go to something that is very objective. So, where do those two meet? Like, where do those two worlds meet?
I mean, you say they're not objective. And at a micro level, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
One person's Twitter rant is pretty meaningless.
Yeah.
Or bots on Twitter. I mean, there are bots.
I've written many bots. I love writing. But the beauty is one message is just an angry rant. 100,000 of them is a very clear signal.
Yeah.
And that's the same with load testing, if I run one user one time and see the result, oh, this is the fastest thing in the world. And then I run 5,000 users at the same time, and you're like, my server's down and my company's gone bankrupt.
Right.
So I treat it kind of the same way. Individual data points.
The average or something.
Exactly. There's a lot. And for Twitter, obviously, I filter out. I think I haven't looked at the numbers in years. It's not something that I monitor, but when I did look years ago, it was over 98%. I filtered out as spam of all the comments. Yeah. So for the hundreds of thousands of opinions in there, there's millions of garbage. But so I see them as actually kind of similar. It's using lots and lots of data to try and figure out what is the truth. And for load testing, that's why I try and use a whole bunch of different tools. That's why I try and test different aspects.
Right.
And it's not just one run on all these. Most of the companies use 2 or sometimes even a few more because we run into issues and they'll say, oh, that's weird. Our CDN's broken right now. Like during this load tests, we figure out things. And I know over the years that a lot of companies, these tests have, you're going to test my test site.
Well, I mean, we can
who
do
watches the
K6
watchers?
well.
Well, there goes my server.
No, but the reason that I wanted to do it was just because I think it's awesome that you have a provision for web page test, because web page test also tests the back end like K6 does, but it also looks at things that are maybe more subjective than just straight response times. So it
Well, they're
also has
pushing-
screenshots, for instance.
So
Sorry,
they're
go
pushing the Google Lighthouse stuff.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on the name, but it's the full content, full paint, the first
Yeah.
content, full paint, all these, Google's new hotness, and I don't know if that'll be its own test or I keep using web page tests as the proxy for that or not. But back to your question about things feeling faster or slower. Hopefully that's not an issue because I'm using an nearly identical website for all of them. So it's not like this website feels faster because they're doing all these tricks. It's still just a stock WordPress site. Although I did discover, or I was reading a blog post somebody wrote, there is a caching plugin, and I don't remember which one it was in the name, that it got really, really high scores on like web page tests and Lighthouse and whatever. And somebody went into the actual code to look, how is it actually getting better scores than everything? And basically they were manipulating the way content was being served to just game these metrics. So even though the site might load identically the same to a user, the way that these tools are reading it were being gamed.
Well, that's
so
also
to your
how
point, that could be true.
See, that was going to be my next question, because if there's a test or if there's like a benchmark, there's always people try to game the system. Apparently it's...
Absolutely. And it's hard. There's a lot of trust involved in what I do, that these companies aren't cheating. And I try and look. I do try and spend a little bit of time during the test to make sure, they say we're on this plan, and, I'll take a look a few times throughout the test to say, do I see anything weird? And if I have SSH access, look at the resource usage. Oh, it's never happened yet, but it's a 2 gig VPS. And if I log in and it's like, there's 64 gigs of RAM here.
That's interesting.
Something like, it's never happened yet, and I'd like to think it hasn't. I cannot guarantee that, and there is a lot of faith working with these companies.
I definitely think there's an element of performance that is subjective, but I think more and more of it can be quantified, just not by the same tool. Like I was saying earlier, K6 is good at protocol level testing, but not in front end testing, which means that it will test how quickly a server will will send the resources that were requested, how quickly that happens, but it's not going to test things like how quickly does the site render. And then even when you talk about the site rendering, that's still a lot of that. Like, what exactly do people look at? So there's an element of psychology. Like when even if a site, let's take the example of two different web pages. They both load in 2 seconds, but one page is just a blank page until you get to 2 seconds where it's displayed completely, and the second page has like some text or a hero image or something that says loading. The qualitative part is that most people will perceive the second site with some sort of feedback as being faster, even if technically it's still the whole end, the whole page still renders in the same amount of time. So I think it's also there are also tests that you can do to check for certain things that people will perceive as, progress. Load progress bars or the loading or buttons for the next one. Like maybe people only go to the home page so they can click login. So why not display that login button first?
Right.
Then their perception is, oh, it loaded super fast. Well, if you had gone a bit further down and hadn't actually loaded yet, but it loaded fast enough for their
your use case, it loaded.
Yeah. So I think that's a very valid question, Floor. It's difficult to quantify all of that though, and to test for it.
All I can say is I'm glad that that's not my job.
It's also awesome though.
It is a very good point, and that's probably more what your clients are doing for the most part, is that, how do we we want to make it really load fast, but there's that psychology aspect of, are there tricks to make what matters load fast? Do we, delayed image loading, all this sort of stuff. And that's really great when you're working on like your site or your product or a client. And then thank God I don't have to care about that, at least for these tests, because that would be an absolute nightmare of everyone doing their own optimization of different loading things that I'd have to compare against. And do I need a psychology benchmark?
Yeah. All right, I
I
think
know what my
we're running
nightmare
out
would
of
be.
time now, but it was great to have you on. Is there anything that you would like to plug? I think we already posted links to the benchmarking site.
No, I don't think there's anything else. I mean, I love doing my web hosting reviews and my benchmarks and providing data about web hosting, real, honest data that you can repeat and test with. And I hope it's helpful to your audience. And hopefully people check out K6 and see how cool it is as a tool to crash your servers really
Look,
fast.
he's even advertising for us.
And we didn't even pay him. What?
I know, it's great.
We should have him on more often.
I mean,
Any last words from either of you?
oh, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, for letting me pretend I'm Simme for one episode.
Nah, you don't have to pretend to be him. You just are Floor.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, you can stick around a little bit after this if you want. But thank you, everybody who's watching now and in the future. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. We will be having the Grafana CEO, Raj Dutt, and our CEO, K6, on office hours to talk about the acquisition. And by the way, Floor,
We're also still hiring.
join us. One of us. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.